Hello everyone, and thanks for joining this webinar today. I am Fulvio Galeazzi from GAR, the National Research and Education Network for Italy, and I am the project manager of the Horizon 2020 project, EOSC-Pillar. Today I'm introducing the presentation of results from the National Initiatives Survey. Next slide, please. Before going on, let me say just a few words on what the project is about, our objectives, and what we plan to achieve. Next, please. EOSC-Pillar is a project involving 18 partners from 5 countries, Austria, Belgium, France, Germany, and Italy. It is a 36-month project, and we kickstarted activities 1st of July 2019. Our goal is to coordinate efforts on open science in those 5 countries and prepare the realization of the European Open Science Cloud. Next slide, please. We are not alone in this effort. And as you probably already know, there are a number of initiatives revolving around the European Open Science Cloud. And specifically, we were funded within the INFA-EOS-5 call together with other regional projects. The picture shows the names of these sister projects and the countries covered. Within EOSC-Pillar, we are tackling at a small scale pretty much the same challenges that are present at the European scale. And we aim to do this with an approach that is efficient, scalable, and sustainable. Next, please. Talking about sustainability, we believe that a sustainable EOS can only be built on the pillars represented by the national initiatives, namely those entities coordinating all actors at national level, scientific communities, research performing organizations, universities, research infrastructures, and e-infrastructures, funding bodies. To summarize this slide, I would say that we need to find common languages to engage researchers, to promote best practices for handling of data and the use of standards for services so that both can be used also across scientific domains and across borders. And we aim to do this, we need to do this to perform a better science and enable new science. We also need to find common language to coordinate and align, both at the national and international levels. Next, please. EOSC-Pillar is producing and will produce results along its lifetime. We have collected a number of different use cases within our partnership, and these will become services which will be offered via the EOS portal and the national portals which are interoperable with it. These use cases are very different in nature, involve data produced by different communities, with services developed in other scientific domains, with computing resources offered by yet different actors. We don't just want to populate a catalog of resources, but mainly we want to see this service in operation and learn by doing in terms of how to practically merge pieces together and so that this experience can serve as a template. And also to see how a service can be operated and maintained and how the national initiatives supporting the individual pieces can share costs and responsibilities. Other key results are the engagement of scientific communities, promotion of FAIR principles, and what we will focus on today, the National Initiatives Survey. Next, please. This slide reinforces the message I gave earlier, that we as a EOSC-Pillar are sort of a small-scale EOSC. And indeed, our activities and results are perfectly aligned with the priorities identified at the European level for the full-size EOSC. I will stop here by saying that it is and it is going to be an exciting journey. And likewise, after setting the objectives, so where you want to go, it is important to understand from where you start. This is the aim of the National Initiative Survey, and I will now leave the floor to my colleagues. Thank you very much. I'm done.
Yes, hello. So my name is Lisa Höniger from the University of Vienna, and I would now like to introduce to you the survey conducted by the project EOSC-Pillar, its main goal and methodology. Next slide, please. So we conducted this national initiative survey to better understand the European landscape of research infrastructures with regard to open data. The aim was to create a comprehensive picture with state-of-the-art data to support the implementation of the European Open Science Cloud. And to do this by addressing and analyzing aspects on organizational, on technical, as well as legal aspects, all relevant to manage data. We created a representative online survey with 4 target groups, various topics, and we involved national and European stakeholders throughout the process to ensure the relevance of the results. Next slide, please. As you can see here, we defined 4 target groups that were invited to participate in the survey. These are universities, funding bodies, research infrastructures of national relevance, and e-infrastructures, and they include, among else, data repositories and archives, computing centers, and high-performance computing. The questionnaire was developed tailored to different target groups and included questions on various topics, such as business models and service level agreements, user support, access policies, and also restrictions, technical aspects such as authentication and authorization infrastructure, further on data management and the FAIR principles, and user communities support and services. Next slide, please. We conducted the survey in October and November of 2019, and in total we contacted 2,204 organizations. We gathered 603 complete responses and 85 partial responses, so 688 responses overall, which gives us a response rate of 31%. Broken down in categories, e-infrastructures have the highest response rate with about 44%, and we have 318 responding organizations. We have 229 responses from research infrastructures, 114 responses from universities, and 27 responses from funding bodies. Next slide, please. To ensure the fairness of the survey data, we will curate and publish the dataset and make it available for reuse via the repository Austria. The DOI and link that are included on the slides here and also in the version that we will share with the public will include the DOI and link to the repository. All additional documentation, such as the survey questionnaire or the method report, are also available there. Next slide, please. Yes, and now we would like to give you an overview into the results, a glimpse into the data. Next, please.
I'm Geneviève Romier, I'm from CNRS. I am going to present you the results of the survey concerning business models, SLAs, and user support. First, business models. It is important to understand what funding bodies fund, and the results of our survey shows that they first fund project-based resources and human resources. In the second step, they fund software and hardware. Half of them fund operational expenditure at large, and a few of them capital expenditure at large and other items. Next slide, please. What are the rules for funding? They use, in first step, competitive process. About a third of them use users' affiliations, users' disciplines, users' location, and a few of them other rules. Next slide, please. It is also important to understand what are the sources of funding for e-infrastructures and services providers. Their first source of funding is state or ministry funds. European funds are available for half of them, and about a third of them get funding from research institutions, universities, funding bodies, and regions and towns. A few of them get funds from research communities, industry, and SMEs. Next slide, please. What are the own revenues of the infrastructures and service providers? We identified that about 40% of these infrastructures and service providers acquire own revenues other than funding. And of these, the sources of revenues are hosting for more than 20% of them, managed online services for about a third of them, consultancy or training for 40% of them, and other sources of revenues. Next slide, please. Service level agreements and user support. Service level agreements are offered for some or all services by about a third of the e-infrastructures and services providers, and about 15% foresee to offer SLAs in the future. They offer mainly customized SLAs, and about 20% of them offer SLAs in the context of participation in a transnational organization. That is very important for EOSC. Next slide, please. How do they support users in the infrastructure? More than 90% describe their services via a website. A little bit less, about 80%, get feedback from users, and about 77% use training to their users. The types of trainings are mainly face-to-face training. For about 70% of the e-infrastructures, online documentation is available, and a few of them organize MOOCs or web tutorials. Next slide, please.
Hello, good afternoon. Jos van Wezel from KIT, the Karlsruhe Institute of Technology. During the survey, we tried to capture also information on access policies, privacy, and some legal aspects. One of the things for accessing data is also a technical aspect. We found that 34% of those that responded have no access restrictions at all to the data, clearly open to the world. And on average, 40% use some kind of group membership to restrict data access. 60% of the people that responded said that they have some kind of access policy in place, which is a document that states formally how the data that is offered can be used and how the access is regulated. And around 50% of those without an access plan, a policy plan, will adopt one in the coming years. Next slide, please. We also checked a little on the legal aspects of the data offered. Most of the providers do not store any personal related data. That's a very smaller part. And all the data that is offered comes with a certain license if offered. Keep in mind that this question was only asked to the e-infrastructures and not to the other targets. Next slide, please. Of the written regulations that come with these offerings online, again, this is for the infrastructures, 30% have a research data management plan in place, so they can tell you what they do with the data. There is open research and a policy on open research data, another third, and there is a written statement on the compliance to the FAIR principles in a little bit less number of cases. However, this means that still 70 to 80% of the respondents have no written regulations of the publicly accessible policies in these topics. Thank you.
Okay. Hello, my name is Anita Boulos. I work for the University of Vienna, and I will present the next larger topic. We have analyzed the concept of fairness regarding data. So, next slide, please. In a first step, we have asked representatives of all target groups, how familiar are you with the FAIR principles regarding data? The graph shows the percentages for all countries. The lighter the color, the more familiar are respondents with the FAIR principles. We find that the majority of all respondents overall indicated to be familiar with the FAIR principles. Most respondents tick the categories familiar or very familiar. Across countries, respondents from research infrastructures are most familiar with the FAIR principles, as 81% indicated to be familiar or very familiar with FAIR data. 77% of all respondents for funding bodies indicated to be familiar or very familiar with FAIR data, as did about 3/4 of all university representatives and 70% of all representatives for research infrastructures. So overall, respondents across all EU infrastructures and all research infrastructures and other target groups are rather familiar with the FAIR principles regarding data. Next slide, please. Next, we wanted to get insights into the fairness of data holdings. Hence, we asked respondents representing repositories, how fair do you consider your data holdings? This graph shows that the largest group are respondents who indicated that their data holdings are somewhat fair, and about 1/4 indicates that their data holdings are very fair. This question asks for a self-evaluation of repositories. This is a valid first step for analyzing the fairness of data holdings, but of course, self-evaluations are always in danger of being biased towards the more favorite outcome of the respondents. Therefore, we wanted to gain more insights and hence ask several follow-up questions that investigate some of the criteria that FAIR data should fulfill. Next slide, please. A first criteria concerning the fairness of data is whether data are findable. Hence, we asked the representatives of repositories whether their organization provides a search feature for metadata. This question is an adapted version of a question in the guidelines of the Core Trust Seal and covers an important aspect of fairness, as searchable metadata allow users to search, for instance, for keywords or authors. As this graph shows, more than 50% of the repositories provide such a search feature. As the answer, this feature is fully implemented. About another 30% of the respondents either are currently working on this feature or already are in the implementation phase of this feature. Hence, overall, repositories either enable users to search metadata or are working towards this goal. Next slide, please. Another aspect of fairness of data is the interoperability of data. In order to gain some insights into this aspect, we adopted another question of the Core Trust Seal guidelines and asked respondents, does your organization provide a data catalog in a machine-readable format? The results are similar to the previous questions. About 45% of all repositories provide on average a data catalog in a machine-readable format, and about 30% either are working on or implementing this feature. These were some glimpses into the survey data concerning the fairness of data. The questionnaire comprises several other questions related to this concept, and we will make further results available along with our final report. Next slide, please. Our next important topics are services and their user. We have asked all respondents representing e-infrastructures which services their organization actually provide to the research community. We selected the categories based on a definition by the European Commission. Overall, 253 respondents indicated that their organization stores and manages research data. Hence, about 3/4 of all respondents that we identified and addressed as representatives for e-infrastructures indicated that they offer this service. 31 respondents indicated that their organization offers high bandwidth networks which transport research data. This corresponds to an average of 13% of all respondents from e-infrastructures. 69 respondents reported that their organization offers high-performance computing, which can be used to process research data. This corresponds to about 1/4 of all representatives of e-infrastructures. Next slide, please. In the next step, we ask e-infrastructures for which scientific disciplines their organization provides services. The response categories are based on a classification by the OECD. Most e-infrastructures provide services for natural sciences. Across countries, about 70% of respondents indicated that their organizations offer services for natural sciences. Ranked next are humanities as well as engineering and technology, followed by medical and health sciences, as well as social sciences. Fewest e-infrastructures offer services for agricultural sciences. Next slide, please. Let's have a look on the uses of these services. We have asked service providers how frequently do the following groups use your services. Overall, universities and researchers based at universities use the services most frequently, followed by non-university research institutions and affiliated. Students are ranked third. On average, 70% or more respondents indicated that these groups use their services frequently or very frequently. On average, researchers of private commercial institutions, professionals, governmental institutions, and citizen scientists are less frequent users. About a quarter of the e-infrastructures indicated that these groups use their services frequently. Next slide, please.
In this section, we would like to present some exemplary results of the survey on a national level, so aspects that deviate from the mean or stand out in another way. On this slide, you will see what we have identified as noteworthy for Austria. The response rate among universities and universities of applied sciences is unusually high, with 28%. The number of research infrastructures, according to the definition that we have employed, is rather low, but 50% of those research infrastructures participated, which indicates a high response rate. We have identified a rather large number of e-infrastructures in Austria compared to the country size, with a number of 80, and the response rate is slightly below the average with 35%. Next slide, please. Familiarity with the European Open Science Cloud in Austria is rather low. 71% of all representatives for e-infrastructures indicated to be not very familiar or not familiar at all with EOSC. This percentage is in comparison substantially higher than the average across the 5 countries, which lies at 53%. 16% of all e-infrastructures indicated that they are part of an organization that facilitates integration into EOSC. This percentage is the lowest percentage of all countries. The means across the countries is 39%, and here we have the highest figure for Italy with 59%. Funding bodies and competition are less important for granting access to services than in other countries. Only 8% of all e-infrastructures restrict access based on the approval of a funding body, compared to the average of 24%. On average, 11% of all e-infrastructures select their users based on competition, but none of the Austrian e-infrastructures indicated to apply the selection mechanism. And lastly, on service level agreements, they are less common among Austrian e-infrastructures. None of the e-infrastructures in the analysis use SLAs for all services, and 12% offer service level agreements for some services compared to the average of 22% across countries. Next slide, please.
Hi, this is Inge van Nieuwenbrug, Ghent University. I will present the country specifics for Belgium. What we saw immediately is that we have a high participation rate of 63%, which in figures means that 52 out of 83 targets answered the survey completely or partially. Especially universities and research infrastructures participated, we saw. Almost all universities, namely 9, have participated in the survey. And we see that universities are familiar with the European Open Science Cloud and with FAIR principles. They think it will be beneficial to contribute to EOSC, and that's what they want to do. They are all familiar with FAIR. Maybe this is easier for smaller countries to get the information across. So that's a good thing to see. If we look at research infrastructures, they are less familiar with EOSC, but very familiar with FAIR. Half already contribute to EOSC, they say, and most of those who don't are likely will in the future. They offer a lot of services, but the services are especially for natural sciences and almost none for engineering and humanities in these targets for Belgium. And 65% have an official roadmap and mostly S3 roadmap. If we then look at the e-infrastructures, there's less familiarity with EOSC. They offer mainly services for natural sciences and medicine, less for engineering than in other countries. Now, funding especially comes from government. That could be that's mainly the state for 60%, region, some EU funding and funding from other funding bodies. They state they have a little own revenue. 4 do for some services, 3 don't charge users, but this is just a small amount that answered these questions, so we can't say that much about it. And to end with, the users are mainly researchers from the university or non-university researchers, less private researchers and private institutions, government, and students are also an important user group. That's it for Belgium.
France have a global response rate within the average. Of the French e-infrastructures that responded to the survey, 60% consider to be familiar with EOSC. 70% think they will be benefit from the EOSC, and 54% are already part of an organization that facilitates EOSC integration. That's a good news. But universities are much less familiar with EOSC. We will have to help us. Next slide, please. More than the half of the e-infrastructures declare to get own revenues in France. User training is offered more frequently in the country's language and less frequently is English. This is something we already know. France has also the highest level of centrally organized user support, and this is a good information for EOSC integration. Next slide, please.
Yes, in Germany, the situation of responses was a little bit low. Therefore, we have split out the different targets on their response rates. And we can see that the e-infrastructures were the most interested to return the survey results. And the universities came in at only 14%. Now, in order to explain a little bit of that, and since many of you who responded to the survey are listening, I've also copied in some remarks that you made about this survey. And of course, it turns out to be difficult for some to gather all the information in this short time. We worked hard to extend and help you there with the question, with getting the things done. On the other hand, it turned also turned out difficult for some of you to find the right person, because the survey was sent to the top level management, and therefore the questions were then forwarded to the specialists and the experts. Next slide, please. Over 50% of the universities say, however, that EOSC will affect their organization, and 3/4 expect to benefit from EOSC. Some of them are even already contributing to EOSC with services or in projects. At the same time, only 50% of the universities say that they are familiar with FAIR, and less than 35% have regulations in place for research data management and open data, as we saw before. The research infrastructures, on the other hand, are more familiar with FAIR, and some of them, even more of them, are already contributing to EOSC. And the majority of the research infrastructures, e-infrastructures, universities indicated that they will start contributing to EOSC. Then at the same time, we asked universities, what research disciplines do you think that will benefit most from EOSC? And it turned out that many, if not all, of those disciplines said they did not expect that many benefits from EOSC. So it looks like that the management level of universities has high expectations, whereas they their researchers see less of interest in EOSC. However, as a whole, the interest in EOSC is substantial, and we will work on the data to get more of the results available on that. Thank you.
Hello, this is Federica Tandongo from GAR, the National Research and Education Network in Italy. And let's go into some specifics for Italy. So responses, we identified more funding bodies than in any other countries, and this reflects the complexity of the scenario when it comes to funding in Italy. We also got an exceptionally high response rate for e-infrastructures, with more than 50% of them completing the questionnaire, which is an interesting fact indeed, because this questionnaire was by far the lengthier of the poll we proposed. Of these, they offer a wide range of services for different disciplines. We got a higher than average number of services for humanities, which is maybe not surprising for Dante's country, but we also got fewer for natural sciences and social sciences. Medical sciences are mixed quantity with not so high level of answers for infrastructures, but high participation in research infrastructures. On a less prior side, we got a lower response rate for universities, which may indicate for us the need to increase engagement with the stakeholder. If we look at fairness and fairness perception, we see that for repositories, we got below average perception of unfair readiness and dissemination in public domain or with CC licenses for reuse, which is consistent with repositories perceiving depositors to be concerned about competitive disadvantage when sharing data. On the bright side, if we are slightly pessimistic on this, only a minority is really pessimistic about this, less than 4%. Regulations, there are regulations in place, but many are informal at this time, maybe indicating a lack of direction for policy, which is consistent if you think that at this moment, in Italy, an open science plan at national level wasn't yet approved. There is an exception, which is regulation for publication of data in repositories. And for those, many written regulations exist. Next, please. So, as I said, we got high responses for infrastructures. They show to have quite a high familiarity with EOSC if compared with other countries. And we also got the largest share of infrastructures already contributing to EOSC with almost 60%. Our infrastructures have high expectations to be positively affected by the EOSC, and in this we registered the largest share of infrastructures indicating that it would be very beneficial for respondents' organization to participate in EOSC. On a more technical perspective, we also note the larger share for authentication members of National Federation services proxies to EduGain. Next, please. So that was all for the preview of the national specifics. And now let me say a few words about what's next. Next, please. So how we plan to use this information, as my colleague Fulvio mentioned in the introduction, it is important where you go, but to know where you're going, it is also important to know where you're starting. And so our idea was to start by providing a snapshot of the state of the art of national infrastructures for research data and services. In particular, we use this to gather information on the readiness level, business models and existing policies and technologies, as well as compliance with the EOSC. This will help building a full picture at the European scale and wider, also thanks to the collaboration with other regional projects. And ultimately, it will have it will give us the opportunity to inform our project strategy, but also to support what's happening at the EOSC, EB and GB level. Next, please. So why are you here and what's in for you? One of the key objectives of EOSC-Pillar is to support and strengthen national initiatives. So our next step will be to work on policies and business model, building on the data we get. National initiatives and other interested stakeholders will get the report and full access to the data, which will be accessible under CC BY license. So you're invited to use the data to inform your national initiative strategy, but also to provide us with feedback, because other surveying activities and study activities are ongoing. So it is important you get involved and participate taking interviews, participate in our workshops, fora to compare and discuss models, and ultimately help us to create a good model and replicable model for EOSC, also at the level of national initiatives, and to make it as inclusive and democratic as possible. Thank you.
Thank you very much to our speakers. And now we will head on to question and answer.